time for everybody's favorite thing, word problems. And so all the things we've been doing this week, all the graphing inequalities, the plugging, figuring out what the vertices are, plugging them into a function of two variables, a linear function of two variables, all those are leading up to this linear programming. And it is they're always word problems, but they really are all the same. There'll be, I can't remember how many you'll have assigned for tomorrow, only really basically actually 3, actually, now that I think about it. So they are long, but it's not the end of the world. They really are all very similar, and we'll walk you through. Okay, I obviously totally ripped this off of the book, and I hope it doesn't make you sick. I'm going to scroll up and down between the steps and the actual problem as we work through it. So define the variable. So let's scroll down. I'm going to scroll down slowly. Step 1 is to define the variable. So here's our little word problem. And so pause it and read it. I'm not going to read it to you. That's ridiculous. The things that you're trying to figure out stuff about are how many acres of wheat, how many acres of rye, 2 different crops, right? And so to make up the variables, you can do with X and Y if you want, you can do whatever. I'm going to do W and R, that makes sense. So make up the variables. So the number of acres of wheat. Oh my gosh. I should have just had this pre-written. Acres. There you go. And R is the number of rye acres. Okay? So step 1 is done. So you read this, you figure out, okay, the things I'm trying to figure out about, that's what we make the variables. We want to know how many acres of wheat, how many acres of rye. So those are pretty good candidates. That's what we're going to make our variables. Then we scroll up. Step 2. So write a system of inequalities. So steps 2 and 3 are probably the hardest part. Step 2 is the hardest part for a lot of students because it really is going from the English to the math, and that really is what makes word problems difficult for a lot of people. Same thing goes for step 5. Step 5, write a linear function. That's the f of x, y. So actually 2 and 5 are the hard parts, at least for a lot of kids, a lot of students with regards to word problems, going from the English to the math. So let's try to do that with the inequalities. So system of inequalities. So he has 10 acres to plant in wheat and rye. Okay, right there. Pause it and think about that. What's that mean about the W and the R? The W and R has to be at most 10. So W, and I lost my marker, W plus R is at most 10. Okay? That's a 10. Ugh. Okay. So that's the first thing. So the first sentence tells us that inequality. However, he only has $1,200 to spend, and each acre of wheat costs $200, each acre of rye costs $100. So that chunk is actually giving us another constraint. These are all called constraints, by the way. What's in blue here is one constraint. What I'm going to write here next is going to be another constraint. It's something that controls how much W and R he can have, how many acres of wheat and how many acres of rye that he can have. How many, I should say. So 200 W is how much is spent on the wheat. Okay. And then 100 R is how much is spent on the rye. Okay, so the number of things made, or planted in this case, times how much it costs to plant that thing, that acre of wheat, acre of rye. If you multiply those two things, that is what it costs overall. Okay, so plus 100 R. So this is how much he spends on wheat. This is how much he spends on the rye, and we know that he only has $1,200 to spend. So in theory, he's not going to take out any loans. Boom, boom. It's less than 1,200. Okay? Another constraint. So the farmer has to get the planting done in 12 hours, and it takes an hour to plant an acre of wheat and 2 hours to plant an acre of rye. So the third sentence gives us another inequality. Okay? So the third one is that, well, it's always some, or frequently something like this. Right? He has 12 hours. Well, how long is it going to take to do it? He has to get the plane done in 12 hours, an hour for wheat. So 1 W is how much it'll take to do 1 acre of wheat. And then 2 R is how much time will be spent on planting acres of rye. Okay? If the profit is 500 per acre and of wheat and 300 per acre of rye, how many acres should be planted to maximize profits? So I'm actually going to scroll up. This sentence is actually the f of xy. Your f of xy, so actually check, check, and actually you don't have to do this in order. I'm about to do step 5, okay? Because it's not a bad idea to think about, okay, what are we actually worried about the whole time? Have that goal in mind. What are we trying to answer? We're trying to figure out how to maximize profit. Okay, and what's the profit? Well, I'm going to use P. P of wheat and R. So this looks not exactly like the f of xy we talked about in class, but it's the same idea. It's function notation, P for profit, and what's it depend on? The dependent variable is P for profit and depends on the 2 independent variables of wheat and rye. And then what is the profit? It's going to be 500 W plus 300 R. Okay, and that is the linear function to be maximized or minimized. We want to maximize the profit. This is a linear function of W and R. So if you just change W and R, X and Y, it will look exactly like one of the things that we talked about in the previous class. So then we have our 3 inequalities that we want to graph. So I want you guys to do this. I'm just going to magically give you the answer. All right, so I want you to pause now and try to, and I know you might not have a graph paper at home, but do your best. Try to graph it on this sheet. And so, by the way, notice I've given you a hint. Draw your axes in the lower left-hand corner. Because guess what? There's 2 secret inequalities that are often there. You can't plant negative wheat. You can't plant negative rye. You maybe could do 0 of one or 0 of the other one. And so W has to be greater than or equal to 0, and R has to be greater than or equal to 0. And that is often, maybe in every single one of the exercises you'll see, I don't remember offhand, those are like the implied inequalities. Those are things that are not in the problem directly, but if you think about it, you're dealing with stuff that's positive. You can't have a negative number of acres, a negative number of wheat or of rye. So you always have these, and basically what this means, and you might not remember, oh goodness, what that means, these last 2 things basically mean that this is in the first quadrant. So up here where everybody's positive. So here's your, and it doesn't really matter, we'll do R and W. Okay, so pause it and try to figure out what they look like. And so make this the R axis and this the W axis. And a hint is divide this guy by 100 first. So in fact, let me just make sure it's clear because I don't want that to be a sticking point because that might be something that just confuses you. This is equivalent to 2W, oh my goodness, plus R. I've lost all ability to, you know what, I'm going to cheat. I'm going to pause and just write it out. So we have, this is a hint, take this guy that I just scratched out. If you divide everything by 100, ta-da, you get something a lot easier to work with. So don't let the fact that we got big numbers intimidate you all. That hopefully that's no big deal. So try to, so after I finish this sentence here, in a couple of sentences, pause it and graph this one, and this one. And then these 2 basically just reminding you that you have to be in the first quadrant, so the upper right. Okay? To try to get that done. All right, so you may have noticed, may or may not have noticed, I screwed up. Look at the oops in the bottom. Okay, I missed one. The line in there is actually a pretty challenging one to do. The line in there, he has to plant at least 7 acres. I glossed over that line. W plus R has to be greater than, or equal to 7. And so what you may have graphed hopefully involves this little small triangle thing, But no, that is where W plus R is greater than 7. And so go ahead and erase that if you did it. But there you go. So I had screwed up a little bit. I forgot about this guy. And so instead of being the quadrilateral, we actually have a pentagon. And so let me real quick, well, let's go through. What have we done here? We have found, we did that. Find the coordinates. Oh, I already checked it off. Whoops. We haven't done that yet. So let's do that real quick. And this is one of the easier things. It's not as bad as a lot of the other things we do. So what are they? They are, it's this corner, this one, and this one. And now quite frequently, if you think about it, what are we trying to do? We are trying to maximize the profit. I rewrote the profit thing down there. Okay, we're trying to maximize the profit. And so what's up is that a lot of times there's stuff that makes sense. There's no way you would ever do that. For instance, you would never plot 0 of each. Clearly the profit would then be 0. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 vertices. But you know what? If you don't plug in 0 and 0 for W and R, then I'm okay with that because, obviously that's not going to maximize the profit. It's got to be one of these 4 guys. And so what are these 4? They are, watch, I actually remember to switch away from the creative pen before I started writing. I'm so proud of myself. They are, well, 0, 0, but I'm not going to do that one. We have 6, 0, 5, 1, 5, 2. That's not 0.2. That's not 0.2. Don't write that. That's nonsense. 5, 2. And then, yeah, 2, 5, and 0, 6. Okay, and actually I screwed up earlier. I fixed it, but didn't say anything. This is confusing. Is RW, when I originally wrote it, if you're copying down, I had them reversed, which is very confusing since we're used to having x comma y, x comma y, and it was backwards. So I fixed it, and in fact, let me fix this too. Yeah. Okay, so yeah, x, y, x is R, y is W, and I wrote this in a way that's maybe less confusing. So you can plug in R and W. And so last but not least, the last 2 things, we know what the vertices are. We plug them in. Oops, that's not what I meant to do. We have the 4 vertices, and then we're just going to do P equals, and then since we're running a little low on time, I've only got a couple more minutes. I want you guys to try to do this, so maybe pause it and make sure you get it right. Verify that you know what's going on. This is like what we did today in class. You use these points, and then I'm going to pause, and they're magically going to show up, and hopefully be the right answer. Okay, so there's your 4 different profit choices, the 4 different possible maximum profits. Apparently, the maximum profit you can make is $3,000, and the minimum actually that he would ever make, so the worst possible decision, excuse me, not $3,000, but $3,100. So there's the max. So that'd be the best decision for him. That would maximize the profit, 2 R's and 5 W's. And then the dumbest thing you could do, okay, would be to go all R, which makes some sense intuitively. It's like, well, that would be the less profitable choice. Less profitable, you know, rye you only make $300 per acre, so all acres of rye would be silly. Worst choice. So max and min. So actually after we do that, let me go back up here. We've substituted the coordinates into the function. We just did that, and then actually answer the problem. So we got to actually go back and finally read it. It's like, how many acres of each should be planted? So it wants to know what combo works best. It doesn't want to know that the max profit is 3,100. It wants to know that we're going to do 2 acres of rye and okay, so actually answering the question, it seems silly to say, but make sure the last thing you got to do is actually answer the question. All this work, you might be like, oh, I'm done. 5 acres of wheat. That would be best case scenario. So that is your answer. All that work, and it's just really 2 acres of rye, 5 acres of wheat will maximize this profit. And boom, we're for like 15 seconds left before I run out of time. Not too shabby. All right, so see you tomorrow.